Hello and welcome, I'm Tafarag Adamu. It's been a little over a year since my guest today became the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Well, we caught up with Roberto Azevedo last week while he was on a short visit to Ethiopia. Roberto Azevedo, a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What brings you to town?
Well, the main reason is the ministerial conference, ministerial meeting of the African Union, the one that we just had. I participated in the opening session, but I also took the time to talk to the Ethiopian authorities about the accession of Ethiopia to the WTO. I also talked to the Commissioner for Trade. I'm talking to Dr. Zuma later today, so it's a very productive visit.
Engaging African countries.
Africa has a very strong trade agenda, but at the same time, you're talking about 54 countries, so it is very diverse, both in terms of views and economic cycles, political cycles, also in terms of capacity, technical capacity to participate in the trade negotiations. So it's a very challenging dialogue with Africa as a whole, but at the same time very rewarding because we sense that there is strong will and engagement towards trade.
Why is it a little bit different? Quite often what we see in this continent is sub-regional economic groupings and so on and so forth. They seem to prefer that than a larger bloc.
It depends on the continent that you're talking about. For example, first of all, Latin America or South America, where I come from, the number of countries is much smaller. You're talking about 54 against 9 or 10. It's a much more diverse environment that you're talking about in Africa. In Asia, for example, you have already a very common and well-established agenda towards trade, for example, with the ASEAN countries. They're all very focused. They have been working on trade liberalization for a long time. Europe, you know the situation. They're a customs union. There are 28 countries, all represented by the Commission. So it varies from continent to continent, but clearly Africa has challenges of its own, which are very specific to Africa.
So, for example, you gave a speech at the African Union, you talked to the Trade Commissioner, you talked to certainly some of the most influential diplomats who are based in Addis that many African countries have. What was that conversation like? You think that there is a positive move forward as far as the challenges you just mentioned?
Well, I have no doubts in my mind that for Africa to develop, for Africa to integrate itself into the world economy, trade has to be an important part. You cannot be relying solely on domestic markets. Even regional markets, they are important, they are building blocks, but they are not enough to promote the kind of development and to realize the kind of potential that Africa has.
They are not enough, or they are not strong enough?
They usually, countries like the LDCs, they have very small domestic markets. So if you are planning on robust and accelerated growth, economic growth, you have to also tap the external markets, the big consumer markets. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge. How to do that, not only exporting commodities or exporting very raw materials, but how to tap those markets at a higher level of value-added production. So that, I think, is the biggest challenge.
But that's the weakest point as far as many African countries are concerned, right?
That's one of the weakest points. To tap foreign markets and to produce for these foreign markets, you also have to have capacity to produce at high level. These markets are very demanding. They require a certain type of uniformity in the products that they're buying, quality, sanitary precautions. So all these things are very difficult to achieve if you don't have, for example, a very intense program to not only develop the domestic national production capacity, but also, and more importantly, to attract foreign investors who bring technology with them, who bring new methods of production and management with them. And for those to come, you need to offer a few things. You need to offer a business-friendly environment. You need to offer political stability. You need to offer predictability. You need to offer economic stability. Rules which are well-adjusted, predictable, stable. All these things need to be in place for that kind of development to enter into a virtuous cycle.
As far as those points that encourage foreign direct investment that you just mentioned, where are the African countries strongly think? Or are we missing the...
Well, the investor is looking for two things. The investor is looking for return, and he's looking for predictability. He wants to know that his return is going to be there, and it's going to be there within a certain period of time, and that the rules are stable, that he knows that he is putting his investment in a place that will honor what was offered from the beginning. So I think those are the two most critical things for the investor, which is stability and return.
What are the African governments doing to kind of address those two important impediments, if you will, that you just mentioned?
Yeah. Africa is a continent with many different realities in it. And it won't surprise you, won't surprise anybody, if in the WTO there are different interests, there are different priorities. So speak with a single voice as an African continent is difficult, unless you come with a very wide scope of demands and of interests. And in the WTO often you have to focus. You have to focus on 2 or 3 things that you really want and push for that, because if you pulverize too much your demands, then you end up not getting enough. So you have to concentrate. And I think one of the biggest challenges for Africa is to establish the priorities. What is it that Africa really needs from the multilateral system in the next few years? We are now finalizing the negotiations of the Doha round. What are the key priorities? What are the things that Africa really, as a continent and as a single voice, need to have from the negotiations? And not only that, which are the priorities which are achievable? We all can ask for the universe. That's easy. But you know that you're not going to get the universe. So what exactly are your priorities, and what can you achieve with those priorities? That kind of exercise has to be done.
Well, definitely you would say, as an answer to that question, trade, right? But there is quite a strong voice coming from Africa. What we need is debt relief.
But trade is
and that brings into North-South dialogue, basically.
But trade is a universe in itself. Even in trade, you have to establish your own priorities. What are the key disciplines? What are the key areas that you want to improve? What kind of commitments do we need from the other trading partners that are useful and helpful for the African development? Those priorities have to be very well established, and they're not easy. They sound easy. Let's just figure out what is it that we want. I wish it were that easy. It's not. It needs a lot of technical expertise. It needs a lot of dialogue in the region itself to establish the priorities, to figure out what are the areas that are most important to Africa. And that, I think, is important to be done, and it's important that it be done soon, because we now have a deadline of July of next year to conclude the work program for the Doha Development Agenda, for the conclusion of those negotiations.
And you're optimistic?
I am realistic. I am an engineer, so an engineer cannot be optimistic or the building will fall, right? It cannot be very pessimistic also, because then nothing happens. But I'm realistic. I think it will be difficult, but the opportunity is there. If we are, at the end of the day, pragmatic, if we are flexible with our goals, with our objectives, and we stay on planet Earth and don't try to achieve things that are impossible, I think it is doable. Let's see.
What are the indications like as you see it now, and talk to me as far as the, time is running fast?
I think right now the will to do it is there. Every single country that I talk to, they want to do it. Even those who have serious difficulties in meeting some of the objectives, they want to do it. I think the major challenge at this point in time is that many countries don't believe it. They think that they're going to put things on the table and that is not going to account for anything, and then what they put on the table is already pocketed by everybody else. So I think the major challenge will be to ensure that you have a collective belief that this is something that can be done. And for that to happen, I think we need to have very quiet conversations with different people, predefining what is it that we're actually going to try to achieve. And say, look, are we all in agreement that this that we're looking at, is this achievable? Is this something that we can do? If that is something that we can do and predefine, I think that that kind of belief and engagement to put things on the table will come more naturally.
Ethiopia's accession to the WTO, where do we stand today, you think?
It's a difficult process always. It takes, in some cases, several years, sometimes decades. But the primary ingredient for that to be a successful undertaking is the political determination, the political will of the country who is engaging in the accession procedure to do it. Because it will necessarily require reforms, it will require changes in legislation, in regulations to make them compatible with the multilateral disciplines. But when that commitment is there, I find that it's always possible to do it in a fairly reasonable amount of time. So again, it will be difficult because the other members of the WTO are going to be negotiating directly with the acceding country. So the Director General, by the way, has no fault. It's not me. It's the countries that negotiate with themselves. But if the commitment is there, it's usually successful. And also, another important thing is that those that are successful and that accede to the WTO, the statistics show that they grow faster than before, and they grow faster than the others that do not accede. Because precisely there is this commitment to reforms, and these reforms are important to make the environment more friendly to business and facilitates global insertion.
But well, that's true. I've read that study too. But nonetheless, Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies. Yet it's not a member of your organization. How do
it can always grow faster? It can always grow in a more balanced way. There are always opportunities that open up when you are a member of the WTO. But each country will have to judge for itself what its key targets are, what its priorities are, how quickly and how readily it is to open up markets in certain areas that members will be looking at to make the reforms. So I think it's a call that has to be made by the acceding country.
How many members do you have as we speak? 160?
160.
And 160. Yes. And how many observers who have got observer status?
Most of the acceding, I don't know. Off the bat, I don't know. Because
how long do they have to stay as observers before they become full-blown members?
They have to begin precisely by manifesting the interest to accede to the WTO. At that point in time, it receives normally an observer status. It participates in the procedures. We establish a working group to facilitate the interaction of that country with the other WTO members. We designate a chair for that working party that will help this dialogue. It's a very long process. Then there will be questions. Members will ask questions about all types of trade policies that are in place in that country to figure out what kind of reforms I needed. Let alone the negotiations on tariffs, right? So they will negotiate tariffs, they will negotiate caps on subsidies. It's a very, very broad and deep conversation.
Right. It's a very, very, very big organization. Basically, it operates like a big watchdog, overseeing trade facilitation and so on and so forth. But then, what takes most of your time as head of the WTO? You are chairing the trade talks, the trade negotiations committee, right?
It varies. It varies during the year and on the moment that the organization is experiencing. So, for example, last year I took office in September. From September all the way through December, it was Bali. You know, the negotiations of the Bali Ministerial that took 90% of my time when I was awake and 90% of the time when I was asleep as well. So that was really demanding. After that, it was about the implementation of the Bali agreements. But I also dedicated myself more to administrative issues. I had more time to look at the organization, the challenges, the secretariat, very, very down-to-earth, you know, administrative issues. So that what also took part of it. And dispute settlement is we have to supervise the functioning of the mechanism. It varies a lot. Right now, it was about trying to overcome the impasse that we hit in July. At this point in time, I suppose that early next year there will be a strong focus on the resumption of the DDA negotiations, and that will probably take most of the time.
Bali is the first comprehensive agreement in your organization's history, 19 years.
It is a major accomplishment, and I don't think that many people realize how difficult it was. Often you hear, well, there was a mini round or a mini DDA, or that was a low-hanging fruit. There was nothing low on that fruit. It was a very high-hanging fruit. We were negotiating that for years. Even before the DDA was launched, we were already talking about trade facilitation. We couldn't do it. So Bali was a major achievement, and I think that it gave members the confidence that they can actually deliver multilaterally.
Mr. Director General, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure having you on my show. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.